Welcome to Deep Psyche. This is where we pause to look inward, where we stop running and start remembering who we truly are. You were told your best years were your 20s, that if you didn't make it by 30, you never would. So you hurried, you performed. You silenced the questions inside you to meet the expectations outside you. But what if that race was never yours to begin with? At 40, something shifts. You wake up not because life is falling apart, but because the illusion is. You follow the script: school, job, smile, be grateful, don't ask too much, don't feel too deeply. You chase success like it was oxygen, because they told you that was life. But now with the noise fading, you hear something else: silence. And in that silence, a truth stirs, uneasy, unfamiliar, but undeniably yours. Carl Jung saw this coming. He called the first half of life a necessary illusion, a stage where we build our persona, the mask we wear to survive, to be accepted, to be someone. But that mask was never made for wholeness. It was made for applause, and slowly, quietly, it begins to crack. What once made you proud now feels hollow. What once felt like success now feels like a performance. The dreams you chased? Maybe they weren't even yours. But this isn't failure. This is the beginning, because as Carl Jung said, the real journey doesn't begin until 40. Before that, you are busy becoming someone. After that, you begin returning to yourself. Carl Jung invites us to step into that second half, not with fear, but with reverence. Because this is not the end. It's the threshold of your becoming. You are not broken. You are simply awakening. For most of your life, you were a collage, stitched together from expectations, obligations, and the silent hopes of others. You became what was needed, what was praised, what was safe. But now, the seams are loosening. Around midlife, something ancient stirs. The psyche begins to revolt, not in anger, but in longing. You feel restless, unfulfilled, maybe even lost. Not because you failed, but because you succeeded in becoming someone you're not. Carl Jung saw it clearly. He called the first half of life a construction, an essential phase of building the ego, the role, the outer scaffolding. But the second half? That is deconstruction, a return, a reckoning. And for many, that reckoning feels like crisis. Because when life asks you to let go of the image you've spent decades protecting, it feels like losing yourself. But it's not loss, it's invitation. An invitation to stop performing, to stop pretending, to meet the parts of you you've exiled to survive. You start to ask the forbidden questions. What if I don't love the life I built? What if success was just another mask? What if the person I became is the very thing keeping me from who I truly am? These aren't breakdowns, they're breakthroughs. Not midlife crisis, midlife initiation, but it hurts. Because if you've spent 40 years being good, a good spouse, a good parent, a good employee, a good citizen, then asking, who am I really, can feel like betrayal. But Jung reminds us, it's not betrayal, it's birth. The slow, sacred birth of the self. He called it individuation, the process of becoming whole. Not perfect, not polished, whole. And wholeness isn't tidy. It demands that you turn toward the parts you've disowned, your rage, your grief, your longing, your lost desires. It asks you to feel what you've numbed, to see what you were taught to hide. Because now you know the world was never stable, and neither were you. You were held together by roles, by approval, by performance. But now performing is unbearable, and real has become non-negotiable. That's why so many people at 40 feel like they're falling apart. But the truth? They're falling into place. The life you built wasn't wrong. It was necessary. It was preparation. But it was only half the story. The second half, that's where your soul steps in. That's when you stop asking, how do I fit in? And begin asking, what do I stand for? This is the turning from survival to presence, from performance to purpose, and the world doesn't like it. Because your awakening threatens the whole system. You're not supposed to wake up. You're supposed to keep buying, producing, pretending. Society has an unspoken rule. At 40, you should shrink. Play it safe. Retire your questions. Retire your fire. But Carl Jung knew better. We cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning. What once drove you, ambition, image, belonging, now quietly drains you because your soul is asking for something deeper, not more, truer. So if everything is unraveling, good, it means the real journey has begun. You start asking dangerous questions. Why am I still chasing approval? Why do I feel lonelier now than I did when I had nothing? Why do I keep pretending this version of life is enough? And suddenly, you're no longer just a person with questions. You're a disturbance to everyone who never asked them. Because when one person wakes up, they become a mirror to those still asleep. Carl Jung understood this. The system doesn't fear rebellion. It fears awareness. So it gives your awakening a name. Midlife crisis, burnout, empty nest, spiritual fatigue. But these aren't dysfunctions, they're initiations. You are not broken, you're becoming. But if they can convince you this transformation is a problem, you'll numb it. You'll go back to sleep. They want you to fear reinvention, because when you reinvent yourself at 40, you prove one terrifying truth. It's never too late to become real. And if that's true, it threatens everyone who settled for a life that isn't theirs. So they'll call you selfish, irrational, immature. They'll say you're going through something. But the truth is, you're finally coming home. You're peeling off the mask, the one you thought was you. And in its place, something ancient begins to rise. Not the ego, not the identity, but the self, the quiet, whole, integrated core of who you are. The part of you that never needed permission to exist. The part that remembers who you were before the world told you who to be. But here's the hard truth. Waking up at 40 means realizing you spent 2 decades building someone else's dream. And now you have to tear it down. Not out of regret, but out of necessity. Because your soul can't live in a house built by fear. And this is why society fears you. Because when you realize you're not stuck, you begin to move. You quit the job. You end the performance of marriage. You create. You wander. You speak truth. You stop apologizing. That kind of person breaks the system. Carl Jung believed the second half of life isn't about doing more. It's about becoming whole. And wholeness is dangerous to a culture that profits from your fragmentation. Because when you are whole, you don't need approval. You don't need applause. You don't need to be understood. You stop asking for permission to evolve. You simply become. And in becoming, you awaken a power that can't be marketed, managed, or measured. You begin trusting intuition over instruction, inner truth over outer validation. You stop chasing youth because you finally understand this moment is the beginning of your real life. Here's what they never wanted you to know. You're not running out of time. You're running out of lies. You're shedding everything that isn't true. Everything convenient, safe, impressive, but not you. You're stepping into a season where authenticity matters more than attention, where depth matters more than charm, where solitude feels like sanctuary, and meaning becomes more sacred than legacy. This is not a crisis. It is a return. You feel it, don't you? That whisper in your gut, that ache beneath your routines, that quiet knowing, this isn't it, and you try to silence it. You say it's just stress, just a rough patch, just life, but it's not. It's the call to wake up. We assume the tools of our youth, ambition, performance, approval, will carry us through. But they don't. They can't. Because the ego ruled the first half, but the second half, that is soul territory. And if you ignore the call, life doesn't ruin you. It dulls you. That's the cost. You become functional, efficient, predictable, but absent. You scroll more. You numb more. You stop imagining. And slowly, you stop becoming. You settle. Not because you're content, but because you're tired. Tired of the quiet war between the life you're living and the truth that won't let you rest. So you tell yourself you're lucky, that it could be worse, that you should be grateful. And maybe you are, but gratitude without growth is just emotional sedation. You weren't born to play dead politely. You're here to evolve. And when you forget that, life doesn't freeze. It pushes back. Your body breaks down, your joy dulls, your relationships wither. Not from conflict, but from disconnection. You're still there, but the real you hasn't shown up in years. Jung would say, you're haunted now by your unlived life. The version of you that was curious, brave, wild, honest. That version didn't die. It just went quiet. But the silence is breaking. And if you don't listen, the whisper turns to bitterness. That's the hidden cost. Bitterness. The slow burning grief of a soul that betrayed itself. It shows up in sideways glances, snapping at those you love, resenting people who dare to change, because you never gave yourself permission to. You start to mock joy, dismiss transformation, despise the mirror. Because deep down you know you chose safety over self. And now, you don't even recognize your own eyes. You scroll through old photos and wonder when your laughter started sounding like performance. You look in the mirror and see someone capable, but not alive. And the longer you ignore the call, the more life numbs you so you can survive the disconnection. You live in your head. You forget how to feel. You stop dreaming, stop desiring, stop believing you even deserve to. And that is the quiet death. Self-abandonment. To be physically present in a life where your soul was never invited. You tell yourself, I'm too old to change. I have responsibilities. This is just how it is. And no one questions you because it's what most people say, what most people believe. But most people are asleep. You weren't meant to be. You were meant to burn, to bloom, to break, to rebuild, to begin again. Not in spite of your age, but because of it. Jung never called 40 a breakdown. He called it the threshold, the doorway to individuation, to authenticity, to wholeness. But most people stop there. They hear the knock and turn the music up louder. So life knocks harder, in the form of divorce, anxiety, insomnia, depression, health scares, existential dread. Not to punish you, but to wake you. Because the self does not disappear. It waits. And when the time comes, it will not ask gently. It will demand your return. But the longer you wait, the more healing it will take to come back home. So the real question isn't, what happens if I change everything at 40? The real question is, what will it cost me if I don't? And the shift doesn't begin with a grand plan. Not a new job, not a plane ticket, not a bold declaration. It starts quieter than that, with a decision. You wake up one morning and realize the version of you the world loves is not the version that feels alive. So you stop. You sit in the silence. And for the first time in years, you ask, what if I let it all go? The expectations, the performance, the mask, the safety net that's been strangling your soul. And from that one simple question, you begin. Not to fix your life, but to reclaim it. Because somewhere along the way, you gave away pieces of yourself to people who didn't understand what they were holding. Your fire, your curiosity, your untamed voice, all for a sense of belonging that never truly belonged to you. But at 40, something shifts. The fear of change becomes smaller than the fear of never changing. You realize the real risk isn't losing what you built. It's wasting what you could still become. Carl Jung called this the second half of life, a sacred threshold where ego is no longer king and the self rises to claim the throne. This isn't reinvention, it's recovery. You're not becoming someone new, you're becoming who you were before the world edited you. You begin to speak differently, slower, with more intention, not to impress but to connect. You set boundaries not from bitterness, but from self-respect. You stop chasing those who only loved your silence. You stop apologizing for your sensitivity. You stop negotiating your truth. You start reading again, painting, sitting in stillness, walking without a destination just to hear your own breath. You no longer fill every quiet space with noise. Because you're no longer afraid of the silence. You trust it. That's how you break free. Not with explosions, but by taking back 1 inch of yourself at a time. You realize you don't need a crisis to justify change. You only need permission. And that permission only you can give. So you do. You stop looking for signs. You become one. You leave the job that made you feel invisible. You write the book you never thought you could finish. You say no to things that feel like slow death. You say yes to what terrifies you and electrifies you at the same time. And no, it's not always graceful. You lose people. You disappoint your family. You outgrow relationships that once felt like forever. You're misunderstood, again. But this time, you don't care. Because now being misunderstood doesn't feel like rejection. It feels like confirmation that you're no longer speaking in the language of the false self. You're speaking in truth. And truth, it has a different frequency. Not everyone can hear it, but the ones who can, they're the ones you were meant to find. That's the hidden gift of the second life. You stop settling for company that doesn't meet your soul. You become magnetic. Not because of how you look, but because of how deeply you've owned your path. There's a peace in your presence now, not because life got easier, but because you stopped pretending it was fine when it wasn't. You've chosen depth over comfort, over approval, over predictability. And that choice rewrites your future. Jung called this individuation the sacred journey of integrating every part of yourself, even the ones you once tried to bury. Now you carry your shadow with pride, not as a weight, but as proof that you survived what tried to silence you. You know who you are now, not because someone told you, but because you finally listened to the voice you spent decades ignoring. You are not too old. You are right on time. You didn't miss your moment. You were becoming ready for it. So here's the truth. Your second life doesn't begin when you escape your past. It begins when you stop betraying yourself to protect it. And once you choose that, you don't need permission to become powerful. You only need honesty. And now you have both. You look back, not with regret, but with clarity. You thought you were behind, that everyone else had it figured out while you were still searching. But now you see it. You were never late. You were becoming. Every detour, every breakdown, every silent scream you swallowed, they all shaped the doorway to this moment. Because the real you, the one that feels warm when alone, the one who speaks with fire, not fear, the one who doesn't beg to be seen, was never gone, only waiting for you to come back. And now you have returned, not as the version they expected, not as the one who kept them comfortable, but as something deeper, unapologetic, unfiltered, alive. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." This is that privilege, not given, but earned, through the fire, through the silence, through the brutal, beautiful process of remembering yourself. You didn't miss your moment. You are the moment. You don't need to catch up. You only need to go inward. Because everything real, everything sacred, starts the moment you stop pretending. And so now you stand here, not ahead, not behind, but exactly where you're meant to be. And the only question left to ask is, if your real life begins now, what are you finally ready to become? You weren't late. You were evolving. And now it's time. If you've been silent for years, holding it together while falling apart inside, comment below, "I'm ready to live." Let the world know your second life begins now. If this spoke to something deep in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, subscribe, and let someone else remember who they are too.